What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to bring you my top 5 sleepers for 2021 fantasy football. If you guys recall, last year on my birthday, my 22nd birthday, I brought you guys my top 5 sleepers for 2020 fantasy football. Well, it's your boy's 23rd birthday today, and the best birthday present you guys can give me is a comment on the video to help us out in the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to the channel if you are new, and like the video, please, if you enjoy. We're going to hit the intro, and then we're going to get right into this. Okay, so the schedule for this video will be my top 5 sleepers in descending order, 5 to 1, with 2 honorable mentions. And then what I'm going to do at the end is review last year's list just for fun to see how I did. So my definition of a sleeper, before we get into anything, my definition of a sleeper is somebody who is going to surprise people that is not going really early in drafts. So I know a lot of people's definitions will be a sleeper is somebody outside the top 150 in ADP. A sleeper is somebody that nobody's talking about. Whatever the case is, my definition for anybody on this list that fits this description is somebody that is going to surprise people that's not going in the top 6-7 rounds of draft. So without further ado, let's get into the first sleeper. Sleeper number 5, Will Fuller, wide receiver from the Miami Dolphins, wide receiver 41, 97th overall pick, currently off the board in drafts. This is not a late round guy per se, but this is a guy that fits that definition of sleeper that I talked about already to a T. This is a guy that I think is going to surprise some people this year. In the later rounds, we're always chasing players who have a chance to become the number one on their teams. But how often do you get a guy that was a number one receiver last year, that was a top 10 fantasy wide receiver last year in those later rounds? Last year, without DeAndre Hopkins on the field, Will Fuller was the bona fide number one wide receiver for this team, and he took over as the alpha in this offense. He was wide receiver 5 in fantasy last year before his 6-game suspension. He served 5 games of it last year. He will need to serve 1 more game of it this year. And he was ahead of Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Justin Jefferson. He was outperforming these guys on a fantasy points per game basis before his suspension last year. He played in 10 full games last year because in week 2, he was out there, but Baltimore absolutely throttled Houston, and Will Fuller didn't play in the second half because they were getting their asses kicked so hard. So I kind of discounted that game because he didn't even see a target in it. But as you guys can see, the 10 full games that Will Fuller played, he averaged 18.89 PPR points per game. Again, would have been good for a top 8 wide receiver in fantasy this year. Receiving targets per game, 7.5 targets per game. That's a lot for a receiver of what we thought Will Fuller was going to be coming into the season last year, which was more of like a deep threat type of receiver. Well, he was commanding targets last year at a high level. And as you guys can see on the screen, he was so productive last year too. Number 1 in yards per target, number 2 in fantasy points per target, number 3 in quarterback rating when targeted, number 6 in yards per route run versus man coverage, and number 8 in fantasy points per game on the season. Will Fuller has been a guy that has always been a talented receiver, has just struggled to stay healthy. And last year, before his suspension, we saw him just string together a bunch of healthy games, and he showed the receiver that he's kind of always been his entire career. And the reception perception numbers bear that out. Again, if you guys don't know what reception perception is, this guy, Matt Harmon, who's been doing this for years, charts every route that a receiver runs and basically separates them in terms of, did they win this route against this cornerback, create separation to the point that if their quarterback threw it to them, they probably would have caught the ball. Matt Harmon charts all that stuff, and these were Will Fuller's numbers. He ranked average or above average in 9 of 10 routes last year, which is basically an elite level wide receiver. And you guys can see the write-up there that Matt Harmon talks about. He proved once and for all that he was more than just a vertical threat. Perhaps the reception perception stat that best encapsulates Fuller's transformation from just a big play specialist, just a deep threat, to a top target was his 74.2% success rate versus press coverage. So when teams were trying to press Will Fuller, it didn't end well for them. So however you want to slice it, whatever you want to look at for Will Fuller's Houston career last year and what he did in 2020, Will Fuller is a good enough receiver to be a true alpha receiver in the NFL. Now he goes over to the Miami Dolphins. He signs a 1-year deal with Miami, and they have a quarterback that is in desperate need of superstar talent, of separation and big play threats like Will Fuller. And we saw the Dolphins not only address it with Will Fuller, but also with Jalen Waddle at the number 6th overall pick in the NFL draft. I think Tua Tagovailoa is a much better quarterback than people think. And I think he was throwing to me, you, and Mr. Magoo out there last year. He had nobody to throw to. This is a guy that can legitimately win versus number 1 corners. We saw him do it last year. If Tua could take a step forward with these new weapons, with Fuller, with Waddle, with some of the other guys that he has there, this offense, and Fuller specifically, can become a true number one target. He can become a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy. The injuries are a concern for Will Fuller. They have been for his entire career. But if you get 10 to 14 games of Will Fuller, like he did last year when he was the wide receiver 5 in fantasy in those first 11 games, then he is worth that 9th round pick that you're spending on him. Even with a 1-game suspension to start the season, he's worth that 9th round pick in spades. PEDs don't make you stay healthier. He didn't stay healthy last year because of the PEDs. I've seen a number of doctors on Twitter debunk that myth. It doesn't actually exist. The PEDs were something like they were a banned substance that he took by accident. It wasn't like steroids that he was on for the season. So he's on a 1-year prove it deal. I think he wants this to turn into a long-term thing, either with Miami or with another team. So I expect him to play through injuries if he deals with any, and to be out on the field as much as he can, because he's looking for that big payday after this 1-year contract. And he thinks he's going to get it if he has a good season. And I think he will. So he's the perfect flex option, in my opinion. You're getting him in flex territory right now. You're getting him in that 8th, 9th round range where you probably already have 2 or 3 running backs, 2 or 3 wide receivers, maybe a quarterback or a tight end on your roster. If you play in a league with 2 to 3 flex spots, I think Will Fuller is the perfect option for you, because he, at his floor with Miami, I think he's going to be the boomer bust wide receiver 3 that we saw earlier in his career in Houston, where he's one big play away from winning you a week. But at his ceiling, we saw top 10 production from him last year. And it wasn't just Deshaun Watson that made him good. He was also good in his own right. So Will Fuller is a guy that I'm snatching up at the 9th, 8th, 9th round of every one of my drafts. The 1-game suspension, the injury history, it doesn't bother me at that price because I know what the ceiling is. I saw it just last year. So the next sleeper that we're going to get into on this list is sleeper number 4, Nico Collins, wide receiver from the Houston Texans, wide receiver 87. 197th overall pick on Underdog. He's not even drafted in the top 300 picks on multi-site ADP. So we go from Will Fuller to the guy that replaces Will Fuller, presumably in the Texans offense. In my opinion, this one fits the more traditional sleeper definition that a lot of people are going to have. The guys that nobody's talking about, the guy going super late in drafts. This is your typical late round dart throw that could pay off big for you. This guy's listed outside the top 300 in multi-site ADP and undrafted virtually on Underdog drafts. And I'm really not sure why, because what I see from Nico Collins reminds me a lot of other rookies that we've seen in the past. It reminds me of Terry McLaurin. It reminds me of what we've seen with Chase Claypool. If you guys don't know who Nico Collins is, it's, fair, because not a lot of people follow fantasy football the way I follow fantasy football during the offseason. But if you're not aware of Nico Collins was a 3rd round pick from the University of Michigan. You guys can see his player profile on the screen right now. Great athletic measurables. This was a guy that jumped over 40 inches in the vertical jump, ran like a 4.45 at his pro day. And then it's been adjusted given the fact that it was at his pro day, but 6'4", 215-pound wide receiver with top 3-round draft capital and great athletic measurables. This is an offense that is deprived of an alpha receiver right now because Will Fuller is gone. Brandon Cooks is really the only proven production that they have there. His college production wasn't great, but he has a good breakout age, 19.5 in college, and he played well when he got opportunities. And the problem with Michigan football, I'm sure you guys, if you're college football fans, know this, is that they had freaking Shea Patterson with Nico Collins. And Shea Patterson couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Jim Harbaugh is the most inept coach I've ever seen in my life. We've seen the Michigan football program misuse elite recruits and elite talents before. We saw it with Donovan Peoples-Jones, who looks like he's going to be coming into his own with Cleveland this year. And I think we're going to see it again with Nico Collins, because that was an absolutely dumpster fire situation that he was in college. And my comparison for Nico Collins, when I sat down and watched the tape on him, was Marquez Valdez-Scantling on the low end, and on the high end was a guy like Kenny Golladay. I think he could develop into a Kenny Golladay-like wide receiver, because we have a raw, physically gifted wide receiver in Nico Collins coming into an offense that is lacking playmakers all across the board. No great running backs, no great tight ends, no great wide receivers. It's really just Brandon Cooks is the only established guy there. And I'm not excited about Tyrod Taylor as a quarterback necessarily supporting a wide receiver for fantasy, but this is a veteran quarterback at the very least, and he supported wide receivers before, like Sammy Watkins in Buffalo. The Texans currently have the lowest projected win total of any team in the NFL at 4, according to Vegas right now. I expect them to be behind a lot, expect them to be throwing the ball to get back into games, and that should lead to a lot of pass attempts, of course, and it should lead to a lot of targets for Nico Collins. Now, the value of those targets won't be very high because they're coming from Tyrod Taylor and a bad offense, but Brandon Cooks is the only target competition that a guy like Nico Collins has, and he's an aging veteran. I'm not even kidding when I say that Brandon Cooks is quite literally 1 concussion away from being out of the NFL. His injury history is really scary, especially his concussion history. So if he misses any time, then we could be looking at a number 1 receiver that you're getting outside of the top 300 multi-site ADP picks. Nico Collins has had some of the hype to back it up, right? The Athletics' Aaron Reese has said that Nico Collins has had plenty of first-team reps in training camp, which is impressive for a rookie, especially when you have guys like Chris Conley, who's a veteran there. He's already beating out guys like that, which is encouraging to see. He also said that he's been one of the most impressive rookies, which isn't saying too much because they didn't have a lot of great high draft capital, but it's still nice to see that they're counting on him to make a big impact. They're counting on him to be a prototype wide receiver like we've seen thus far. The most recent preseason game that we saw against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Tyrod Taylor played 27 snaps in it. Among the wide receiver room, Nico Collins played the second most snaps by a pretty wide margin, just behind Brandon Cooks, as I mentioned, who's going to be his biggest target competition. So Nico Collins is a guy that I think is the perfect dart throw because you should know right away what you have in Nico Collins. If he's on the field early, if he's on the field during the season running 85, 90% of the snaps, then you can hold on to this guy and hope that he develops into something. And who knows, maybe he comes out guns a-blazing right away and is productive. But if the opposite is true, if he's playing 40% of the snaps, Chris Conley's playing over him, whatever the case is, you can cut bait, no harm, no foul. You took this guy with the last pick in your draft anyway. But we've seen a prototype alpha-sized wide receiver like Nico Collins come in just last year and make a big impact as a rookie. Chase Claypool fits that same kind of prototype, a 6'4", 210, 220, 230 pound wide receiver that has great speed, great athletic measurables, and comes into a window of opportunity. And that's exactly what I see with Nico Collins. And I would argue that he even has more opportunity than a guy like Chase Claypool had last year. He really has the framework to be a great fantasy option this year. Athleticism, talent, opportunity. He really just needs to go out there and do it. So if Nico Collins is this talented player that I think he can be, I think he's a little bit raw, so it might take him a couple weeks. But once he gets out there and once he is fully comfortable in the NFL, I really expect this guy to be a productive fantasy wide receiver. And if he's not a great late round dart throw, I expect you guys to be hearing his name called at some point on waivers during the season at some point. So I would suggest drafting this guy if you have a deep bench, holding on to him for a couple of weeks, seeing what you have. And he could turn into a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 at worst in fantasy, and has probably the upside to be a wide receiver 2 in fantasy. The next sleeper that we're going to be getting into is at the quarterback position. Quarterback Zach Wilson from the New York Jets, quarterback 27 right now in ADP, 173rd overall. Now, you guys know that I called this guy the baby-faced assassin. He was my quarterback 2 pre-draft before the NFL draft. I really love this guy as a prospect. I'm going to basically outline who he is just to make sure everybody knows. Zach Wilson was the 2nd overall pick in the NFL draft this year to the New York Jets from the BYU Cougars football team. His game, if you guys haven't watched Zach Wilson, closely resembles a guy like Kyler Murray, in my opinion. That was my comparison for him. Now, I don't think he's quite the athlete that Kyler Murray is because Kyler Murray is like one of the best athletes in the NFL, probably pound for pound. But Ryan Tannehill and Aaron Rodgers is more so the athleticism mold that you're looking for with Zach Wilson. And I think his play style kind of resembles all 3 of those guys to some degree. So that's the type of player that we're talking about here. As far as strengths of his game, he had the best deep ball in the class, bar none. It was all the advanced metrics. Everything points to the fact that Zach Wilson is tremendous throwing the ball downfield. He was great outside of structure too. Anytime he was on the move, anytime he was out of the pocket, he was excellent at creating plays on his own. And he also can contribute as a runner as well. In the ground game, he had 250 yards rushing last year and 10 rushing touchdowns. He doesn't have Kyler Murray level athleticism on the ground, but he does have that Aaron Rodgers, Ryan Tannehill level of athleticism early in their careers when we saw them run the ball quite a bit. So that's kind of the whole background on him in the offseason. But here's why I like Zach Wilson so much for fantasy this year. And there's a couple reasons. So let's start with the situation because I already kind of outlined his talent. But Wilson, I believe, fell into the 2nd best situation behind Trey Lance of any of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL draft this year that went in the 1st round. He has one of the most improved offensive lines in football, thanks to general manager Joe Douglas, who drafted Mekhi Becton in the top 12 last year, who was great at left tackle in his rookie season. They signed Morgan Moses, who is a great right tackle for the Washington football team, to lock down that side of the offensive line. And they traded up in the NFL draft to draft Elijah Vera Tucker, who is bar none the best offensive guard in this class. So that's 3 positions that have which should be bona fide studs at those positions. And the other guys are basically all they need to be is average starters for this to be a pretty good offensive line. O-line play, as I talked about in the offensive line video that I did a couple weeks ago, can lead to a huge spike in points per game for teams. A coaching staff also can have a big time spike in that points per game output as well. And this coaching staff that came in is not the Adam Gase New York Jets. Mike LaFleur comes in, who was formerly the passing game coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers. We saw the 49ers put up some pretty good seasons as a passing offense with mediocre quarterback play, with Jimmy Garoppolo as their best guy. They had a lot of Nick Mullins, a lot of CJ Beathard, and they were still a respectable passing offense. So that's what Mike LaFleur brings to the offensive side. Robert Saleh, who is the defensive coordinator in San Francisco, comes in as head coach. And I really like what they're doing there. So when you look at the scheme fit of Zach Wilson to Mike LaFleur and that San Francisco 49ers wide zone scheme that they run, Zach Wilson ranked #1 in this class on play action with a 156.1 quarterback rating and a 17-0 touchdown to interception ratio. So he was excellent on play action. He was also really good on bootlegs and plays outside of the pocket, as I mentioned. #3 in the class in passer rating on bootleg plays. And Mike LaFleur utilizes both of these things, bootleg plays and play action, at a top 10 rate in the NFL. And exactly what you're going to be getting out of Zach Wilson, probably, and then some, is what you're going to get out of Mike LaFleur, because they didn't really have mobile quarterbacks like Zach Wilson in San Francisco. So they might even tune that play action and bootleg stuff up even to a higher degree, similar to what we see in Tennessee with a guy like Ryan Tannehill. So that's one of the reasons I like Zach Wilson, or two of the reasons. Offensive line play, coaching staff. Another reason is that he has playmakers around him. You guys are going to hear me talk about Elijah Moore in a couple minutes, but Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, Michael Carter, the Jets are actually forming a somewhat formidable offense now. They have some good playmakers around their young quarterback. It's something that Sam Darnold never really had, unfortunately, but that's the main reasons that get me excited about Zach Wilson. But the second reason is the continued buzz and what I've seen from Zach Wilson so far in training camp and in the preseason. He's basically looked incredible this preseason, and the buzz from camp has not stopped since he took the field. The second he got on the field, once his contract dispute was over, he had one bad practice and it was guns a-blazing after that. I don't put too much stock into fluff reports that Zach Wilson looks great and things of that nature, especially the one that you guys can see on the screen right now. Zach Wilson is not going to be the next Josh Allen. He's going to be way better than Josh Allen. I don't put too much stock into things like that, but the frequency of reports is the important thing, and how we've seen it coming from multiple sources. And both are true for Zach Wilson, right? We've seen PFF praise his play on tape in the preseason. We see he was first under pressure, first with a clean pocket among rookie quarterbacks in the preseason. And we see this tweet thread from Alan Hahn. He says, as a Jets fan, we're usually cautiously optimistic, is what he says, because we've had bad quarterbacks in the past. And he talks about all the quarterbacks and all the media people, all the beat reporters praising Zach Wilson, Steve Young, Tony Romo, Chris Collinsworth. All these guys have talked up Zach Wilson, and Zach Wilson's play has backed that up. The beat reporters, the coaching staff, his teammates are all talking him up. And this reminds me a lot of Justin Herbert last year, because Zach Wilson and Mac Jones, to a certain extent as well, these guys were the whipping boys of the NFL draft. Everybody wanted to talk down on them. Everybody wanted to nitpick and dissect their games more critically than Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and Trey Lance. But both quarterbacks, especially Wilson, landed in landing spots that are going to accentuate their strengths. And Justin Herbert was basically the same thing. In 2020, a lot of people wanted to shit on Justin Herbert's game in the NFL draft cycle, but they didn't realize that he had a lot of tools to be a good quarterback, and he landed in a good spot with good playmakers around him. And with Zach Wilson going to the Jets, as I mentioned, this is a team that can accentuate the strengths of his game. And in Superflex, back to fantasy, he's the perfect quarterback 3 to have, because he's not going to lose his job, and he has a lot of upside if he can have like a Justin Herbert-like rookie season. And in one quarterback leagues, I also think he's a good upside swing to have on your bench. If you guys have drafted already and maybe you have a Ryan Tannehill as your starting quarterback, throw Zach Wilson at the end of your bench and see what happens. Because if he turns into something, if he turns into what Justin Herbert turned into last year, then suddenly you have a good trade piece on your team, or you can just play matchups with the two quarterbacks that you have. So I think he's a great stash in one quarterback leagues, but especially in Superflex leagues, if you guys are in them, he is a great quarterback from a redraft and a dynasty perspective. I have personal skin in the game with this guy. I put a bet down on him winning Offensive Rookie of the Year because I think it was criminal how low his odds were. But anyways, that's Zach Wilson. I think he's the best sleeper quarterback this year in fantasy football. If you guys are looking for a late round quarterback in Superflex, or a quarterback to stash at the end of your bench in one quarterback league. So sleeper number 2, and we're going to move over to the tight end position for this one. Cole Kmet, tight end of the Chicago Bears, currently going off the board as tight end 23, 169th overall pick. And again, some quick backstory on Cole Kmet if you guys don't follow the NFL draft. This was a rookie tight end last year from the University of Notre Dame. You guys can see his player profile on the screen right now. 6'4", 262 pounds. Pretty good athletic testing. 4'7" at 262 pounds is pretty good weight adjusted speed score, over 106. Best comparable is Vance McDonald. He's a young player still. So Kmet was the first tight end off the board in the 2020 NFL draft to the Chicago Bears in early round 2. He was picked 211 of the second round. As rookie tight ends often do, though, he didn't really make a big impact as a rookie. He showed enough to make him one of my favorite sleepers this year in fantasy football at the tight end position. And the reason is because when you dig into the numbers, as the season went on, his role expanded big time. You guys can see on the screen right now, his snap share at the beginning of the season was typical rookie tight end stuff, right? 30%, 35%, 40% even. But once week 10 hit, his role took a huge uptick. Basically, you see 68%, 79%, 95% of the snaps. He was running way more routes, getting more targets, things of that nature. And early in the season, he was playing second fiddle to Jimmy Graham, who ironically was the tight end 8 in fantasy points from weeks 1 to 9. So we've already kind of seen a Bears tight end be viable in this offense, in Matt Nagy's offense. But from week 10 on, he was consistently on the field running routes and playing the most snaps at tight end. And he even played 84% of the snaps and saw 4 targets in the Bears' only playoff game against the New Orleans Saints. This is the starting tight end of this offense. And we've really seen the starting tight end be valuable in this scheme before, because remember, Matt Nagy runs a similar scheme to Doug Peterson, to Andy Reid. Offenses that we've seen make Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert be great fantasy options. And I think Cole Kmet is the next guy in line, maybe not to be Travis Kelce, but to be potentially Zach Ertz or Dallas Goedert in this type of scheme. And Cole Kmet is the starter of this team. We saw it last year towards the end of the year, and we've seen it so far in the preseason this year. You should not be worried about Jimmy Graham one bit, because in the first preseason game, which was the only one that all 3 tight end starters played, Jesse James, Cole Kmet, and Jimmy Graham, you could see that Cole Kmet significantly outsnapped these guys with the first team, 7 snaps to a collective 3 between those 2 guys. And this was the only game that all 3 starters played. In the second preseason game, Cole Kmet was out with a minor injury, and Jimmy Graham was actually the second tight end to Jesse James. So Jimmy Graham shouldn't be a concern for anybody at all. In the one game where all starters played, Cole Kmet ran 4 routes of his 7 snaps, and Graham was blocking on both of his snaps. So this is a guy that should be the move tight end, should be the receiving tight end for this offense. So for Cole Kmet, it's pretty simple for me. He is a tight end who is a talented prospect in his second year with the starting job on lock pretty much. And he receives a quarterback upgrade in Justin Fields. At some point in the season, Justin Fields is going to take over the job. I expect it to be relatively early in the season. And he has a path to be the second or third target in this offense behind Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney. So this is a guy that has legitimate opportunity in front of him, was a talented prospect, and is getting a situational upgrade at quarterback. So Cole Kmet, in my opinion, at tight end 23 prices, if you compare, as we talked about yesterday in the must draft tight ends video, if you compare a Rob Gronkowski, a Jared Cook, maybe if you want to take a Noah Fant or someone earlier in the draft, take Cole Kmet, stash him at the end of your bench. And again, this is a guy that you're going to know right away. If he comes out week 1 and plays 90% of the snaps and is running all the routes, he's going to be valuable for fantasy. But if he comes out week 1 and he's playing 55% of the snaps, splitting time with Jimmy Graham, then you can just cut bait with him. No harm, no foul. So that was the number 2 sleeper on the list. Now, number 1 sleeper on the list, drum roll, please. Elijah Moore, New York Jets, wide receiver. And you guys probably knew this was coming, but Elijah Moore currently going off the board as the wide receiver 56, 137th overall pick. This was a guy that I was absolutely enamored with in the pre-draft process. 34th overall pick in the 2021 draft. It's been well documented that the New York Jets would have selected him in round 1 had they stayed at their 23rd overall pick instead of trading up for the left guard, Elijah Vera Tucker, that I mentioned earlier. They said they would have taken Elijah Moore at 23 if he would have just fallen there, and he would have. So Elijah Moore has basically been able to uphold sleeper status for one reason, because he's been banged up this training camp. Because I can assure you, Terrace Marshall's a perfect example. If Elijah Moore had been on the field during preseason games, his ADP would be through the roof right now, because this kid is so freaking talented. I can't get over how talented this kid is. Thanks to a minor quad injury, though, that caused him to miss about 2 weeks of training camp, his ADP has been relatively low still, and he's had 3 weeks to recover, 4 weeks since week 1 from the injury. So if you're worried about the quad injury, I wouldn't be, because he's had a number of weeks to recover. He's already practicing. He's already back to his normal self. And when it was reported that he had the injury, it was said that he avoided serious damage or anything like that. So why I love this kid so much and why I think he's going to be great for fantasy this year is for a couple reasons. Now, let's start with his talent, and you guys can see his player profile on the screen. His best comparable player is Tyler Lockett. That was my comparison for him as well. I think everything that he does reminds me a lot of what Tyler Lockett does. The size, the ability, the route running, the speed. His legitimate 4.3 speed is what he ran at his pro day. And he was uber productive in college, right? You guys can see his college dominator rating, 85th percentile, great breakout age, great college target share, 98th percentile college target share. And you can see in his season logs, in 2018, he was a 18-year-old freshman playing behind A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, DeMarcus Lodge, who was a talented college receiver, and Dawson Knox, who was a tight end pick from the Buffalo Bills in the NFL draft. He was playing behind all those players, and he still managed to put up 400 receiving yards as an 18-year-old true freshman. Everything about this kid's production is impressive. And once those guys went on to the NFL in the 2019 NFL draft, A.J. Brown was gone, DK Metcalf was gone, Dawson Knox was gone, DeMarcus Lodge was gone. Once those guys left, this was Elijah Moore's team. You guys can see as a 19-year-old, he put up 67 receptions, 850 yards, 6 receiving touchdowns in 12 games. Pretty solid production. But this past year, what he did, 8 games he played, 86 receptions in 8 games, 1,193 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns with an 85% catch rate. This guy is incredible. Once the talent was gone in 2019, this was his team. This was his offense at Ole Miss. And you guys can see his reception perception numbers, courtesy of Matt Harmon. This was a guy that was winning on 8 of 10 routes significantly. Wasn't too good on post and outs, but he was winning above average on 8 of 10 routes. And his success rate versus coverage, 95th percentile versus man coverage, was the best in the 2021 NFL draft class. It was better than Jamar Chase. It was better than Devontae Smith. It was better than Rashad Bateman. It was better than Jalen Waddle. It was better than all of these guys. And his 83rd percentile against press was also second best in the class, 79th against zone. Also one of the best in the class. And he and Devontae Smith were actually the only 2 receivers in this draft class that ranked greater than the 75th percentile versus man, zone, and press coverage across the board. Both of these guys have target opportunity in front of them. And like I said, both of them are 2 guys that I'm not leaving drafts without. And then as far as offseason buzz goes, I talked about it for Zach Wilson already. It has been Elijah Moore at the top of offseason buzz and then everybody else in the NFL. Nobody has gotten more offseason buzz, in my opinion, than Elijah Moore has gotten. And again, we don't want to pay attention too much to individual reports or comparisons because Connor Hughes said back in May that he paired Elijah Moore to Odell Beckham and Antonio Brown. That's not what I'm talking about when I say offseason buzz. I'm talking about the fact that each day that this guy has been in practice, we've heard great things. All the reports on the screen right now, most impressive player at OTAs. Robert Saul has been extremely impressed with Elijah Moore's spring. Corey Davis, he doesn't seem like a rookie. He's out there leading the guys. I can't wait to see what he does for us. He's really comfortable out there and he's been there before. He's a baller on and off the field. These are the types of things we've been hearing every day for Elijah Moore. It's not just one time. It's not just one report. It's truly a blessing that this guy played 0 preseason games because like I said, the second this dude hit the field and he was held out of that 3rd preseason game, as were all the starters for the New York Jets, the second this dude hit the field, his ADP discount would have been curtains. His ADP would have skyrocketed the way we've seen from a guy like Terrace Marshall. And as I mentioned for Zach Wilson, if there was a formula that I could make up that for how to predict sleeper offenses in the NFL, the Jets would have it in spades because it would read new coaching or better coaching, better quarterback play, better offensive line play, better weapons. I think you can make the argument that the Jets are the most improved team in every single one of those areas across the NFL because their coaching staff is bar none way better than it was last year. Their quarterback play is much better, in my opinion, with Zach Wilson. Their offensive line, as I mentioned, those 3 additions over the last 2 years are going to make a big difference. And their weapons core with Corey Davis being signed in free agency, with Elijah Moore being drafted, with Michael Carter being drafted, Keelan Cole is a depth piece. I think their weapons are much better than they were last year as well. The Jets might be the most improved team in the NFL this year. And to me, with Elijah Moore, this is an absolute auto pick anywhere outside of the round 8, round 9 range where I'm willing to draft him. But if he's on the board in the round 10, round 11, round 12 area, you shouldn't even think twice. He should be your pick every single time. So some honorable mentions before I get into how I did last year and quickly reviewing what my sleepers video was last year. Some honorable mentions include the Raiders wide receivers. Again, pick your poison. Henry Ruggs was on the list last year. Bryan Edwards was a guy that a lot of people were excited about last year. Both guys kind of disappointed, but we're hearing good amounts of buzz around both guys. And there's a good chance one of them or both of them step up this year and can contribute for fantasy this year. So Bryan Edwards, Henry Ruggs, if you guys want to take a shot on either of those guys, there's some great honorable mention sleepers that I like as well. And then Savon Ahmed is another guy that I like at running back because I don't believe in Myles Gaskin very much. So Savon Ahmed to me is a great 16th round pick to take because I think this offense and this backfield could be a committee of some kind. And Myles Gaskin hasn't shown the ability to stay healthy thus far in his NFL career. So maybe Ahmed could get on the field. And when he was on the field last year, he got a full workload and he was good with it. So those are kind of my honorable mentions. Now let's get into last year's list because as I mentioned, last year on September 4th, 2020, my 22nd birthday, I released the top sleepers for 2020 fantasy football. And it's the highest viewed video currently on this channel. And I'm hoping that this video can do similar numbers. So leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new down below. But these were the players that I talked about in last year's video. So the first guy that I talked about was Antonio Gibson, right? The news just broke that Adrian Peterson was released right before I released the video. And Antonio Gibson to me was in an absolute smash spot. I said in that video, and I quote, if this guy's available in your 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th round of your fantasy drafts, hit the smash button. And that was a complete and utter hit by me because he was legitimately a top 5 running back for the first 12 weeks of the season before he suffered that turf toe injury. So that was the biggest hit of that video for sure. Chris Herndon was the next guy that I talked about, which was kind of a big yikes. Again, I believed in Chris Herndon. I believed in the reports that we were hearing. The offseason buzz was really real on Chris Herndon. He just didn't, produce. It didn't materialize into anything. So that was a big yikes on me, but it costed you a last round pick of your draft. So I don't feel too bad about that one. I talked about a couple of rookies as well. Joe Burrow, Jerry Jeudy, and Henry Ruggs. Again, kind of mixed results there. Joe Burrow was solid when he was on the field, but then he got injured, obviously. Jerry Jeudy was solid in spurts. He was an okay flex option. But again, I think he could have been a little bit better. I think I was expecting a little bit more from him last year. And then Henry Ruggs, again, he kind of face planted his rookie season. He had the opportunity in front of him, wasn't exactly able to make the most of it. So again, not the greatest results there. But again, these are sleepers. I'm not expecting to hit 2, 3, 5, 4, 5 out of 6 of these. Like I was expecting to hit maybe 1 or 2 of them because with sleepers, you're going outside of the top 10 rounds or so in ADP. They're pretty hard to hit on at that point. And then the last guy that I talked about was Jerick McKinnon. And Jerick McKinnon had, again, some mixed results, but he was really good at the beginning of the season. Once Raheem Mostert was banged up, Jerick McKinnon played a pretty big role for the San Francisco 49ers. So I would say Antonio Gibson was really the only hit of that list, but there was a couple guys, Joe Burrow, Jerry Jeudy, and Jerick McKinnon that had some usable fantasy production. So I'll count that as like 1, 2.5, maybe 1 to 2.5 of the hits out of the 6 players that I talked about. So that was the sleepers video, guys. Again, if you enjoyed, leave a like on the video. It helps us out tremendously. It takes you 2 seconds and it helps us out. It helps us grow. Comment your favorite sleeper for 2021 fantasy football down below in the comment section. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. We're closing in on 6,000 subscribers. We're hoping to get there as soon as possible. So hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Peace out, guys, and enjoy your day.
Wire me the money.